My fiancée confessed she was only marrying me for financial stability, so I called off the wedding and walked away before sacrificing my future for a loveless, one-sided relationship. A sense of elation washes over you when you believe your life is perfectly unfolding. That's precisely how I felt, engrossed in fabric samples and blush-toned rose swatches, each selection infused with the excitement of picturing my wedding day. It wasn't merely a celebration of affection. It was a testament to the profound belief I held in the life my fiancé and I were building together. My days blurred into a series of appointments with florists, tastings with caterers, and consultations with a wedding planner. My loved ones eagerly joined the process, offering advice that was often as overwhelming as it was well-intentioned. Everyone wished to contribute to the ideal day, though the definition of perfection seemed to shift with every new opinion. My fiancé possessed a grand and unwavering vision. The venue had to be the estate we'd visited on our first anniversary, an opulent expanse of manicured gardens and cascading fountains. The gown she chose was custom-made, a cascade of silk and lace that came with a price tag which made my stomach clench. The embellishments, too, seemed more fitting for royalty than for a modest gathering of dear ones. Initially, the extravagance felt like evidence of her deep commitment to our union. She spoke with a fervor that made her choices appear reasonable, even when I hesitated. Every concern I raised, whether about cost or the practicality of certain decisions, was met with reassurances. She would take my hand and tell me it was all worthwhile because this day would be etched in our memories forever. I yearned to believe her, but subtle concerns began to gnaw at me. In the quiet moments between all the planning, I noticed how our conversations remained tethered to the wedding itself, as if life beyond that day simply didn't exist. When I attempted to discuss shared aspirations, where we might reside, how we'd travel, the kind of future we'd forge, she would gently guide the discussion back to the immediate arrangements. One evening, as we sat at the dining table reviewing our budget, I suggested scaling back on some of the more expensive elements. Her response was swift, almost offensive, insisting these were non-negotiable. It wasn't anger, precisely, but it carried a weight that left me silent. She pledged again that this day would be everything we had ever dreamed of, and I allowed myself to be soothed by her conviction. Yet the doubts lingered. They crept in during solitary moments, like when I gazed at the receipt for the venue deposit or replayed her words in my mind. I dismissed them as the natural jitters accompanying such a significant life event. After all, who could orchestrate a wedding of this scale without a few hitches? I told myself it was merely stress, hers, mine, ours. I persuaded myself that every compromise, every uneasy sensation, was simply part of the journey. Wasn't it normal to desire everything to be flawless? Didn't that signify she cared as profoundly about our life together as I did? As I drifted to sleep that night, I tried to focus on the positives, the way her smile brightened when she spoke of the ceremony, the sparkle of excitement in her eyes when we discussed the guest list. But somewhere deep in my chest, a tiny voice whispered a question I wasn't ready to confront. What if perfection meant different things to each of us? The evening commenced like many others, a gathering of companions over delightful food and wine. There was an effortless camaraderie, the sort that makes you feel as though everything is precisely as it should be. My fiancée was in her element, captivating the group with wedding updates. She described the venue with such vivid detail that even those not planning to attend could perfectly visualize it. Initially, a surge of pride filled me. Seeing her so animated reminded me why I adored her. But then, as the conversation turned to our future, she uttered a remark that chilled me. She said she was most looking forward to the financial stability marriage would offer. Her tone was light, almost playful, and the others at the table chuckled along as if it were an obvious jest. I laughed too, or at least I believe I did. It was an automatic reaction, more reflex than feeling. Inside, something fractured. Her words didn't resonate. They clashed with everything I believed our relationship represented, yet she'd spoken them so casually. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. The discussion moved on. Laughter came and went, but my thoughts remained fixated on what I'd heard. I wanted to push the sensation aside, convince myself it was nothing, but the unease persisted. In the car on the journey home, the silence between us felt unnatural. Normally, she'd be talkative after a night out, recounting the highlights, but tonight I couldn't match her energy. I kept replaying her words in my head. When I finally summoned the courage to address it, I inquired about her comment. She brushed it off effortlessly, claiming it was just a light-hearted remark, nothing to dwell on. Her explanation should have reassured me, but it didn't. Instead, it planted a seed of doubt that began to sprout the moment she turned her head back toward the window, as if the conversation was concluded. That night, sleep eluded me. The room felt too quiet, too still, and my thoughts too loud. Her comment wasn't merely an isolated misstep. It was part of a broader pattern I'd been attempting to ignore. I considered how she insisted on doubling the photography budget for the wedding, how unyielding she was about having the most extravagant options even when I'd suggested cutting costs in certain areas. She'd found ways to dissuade me. At the time, I'd convinced myself she simply desired the best for us. Now, I wasn't so sure. The more I reflected, the more moments surfaced, times when her priorities seemed skewed toward outward appearances rather than the fundamental connection we were supposedly building together. It was like watching a puzzle slowly come into focus, each piece more disquieting than the last. Lying there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I had always believed our relationship was founded on love, trust, and shared aspirations, but now I questioned if we even desired the same things. Her laughter earlier that evening, the casual way she'd spoken about money, felt like a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. I remained awake for hours, gazing at the ceiling, wondering if I was overreacting or finally seeing things clearly. I didn't want to doubt her. I didn't want to question the core of our relationship. But for the first time, I felt a fissure beneath the surface, one I couldn't ignore. When dawn finally broke, I still had no answers, only questions I wasn't certain I was ready to face. The air in the living room was thick with unspoken tension. It had been accumulating for days, seeping into every interaction and burdening the silences between us. I could no longer disregard it. I needed clarity, even if I wasn't sure I was prepared for the answers. I waited until we were both seated, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the room. My heart raced as I tried to formulate the right words. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady but softer than I intended. I brought up the unease that had taken root after her comment at dinner, framing it as a need to comprehend, not accuse. I asked her about her vision for our future, what she truly desired for us. At first, she deflected, her tone light, as if attempting to dispel my concerns with reassurance. But I persisted, my words measured but firm. I spoke about the moments that didn't feel right, about how frequently our conversations seemed to revolve around money and appearances rather than the life we'd share. Her expression shifted. The practiced composure she carried fell away, replaced by something more difficult to decipher, perhaps discomfort, perhaps frustration. For a long moment, she didn't respond. When she finally did, her words emerged slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. She admitted that security was vital to her, more important than she had ever let on. She spoke about her past, about difficulties she had encountered before we met. There had been times, she said, when she didn't know where her next meal would originate or how she would maintain a roof over her head. Those experiences had shaped her priorities, making her view stability as the ultimate objective. I listened, attempting to process her words, but her next statements cut deeper than I was ready for. She confessed that while she cared for me, what primarily attracted her to our relationship was the life I could provide, the stability, the safety, the comfort she had long yearned for. Her voice was calm, as if she expected me to understand, but I felt as though the ground beneath me was crumbling. I realized then that her affection for me wasn't the foundation of our relationship. It was a secondary thread woven around something far more practical and detached. I asked her if she ever loved me for who I was, beyond what I could offer. Her hesitation before responding told me everything I needed to know. She said she did, but it felt like an afterthought, as though she was trying to convince herself as much as me. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in as the weight of her words settled over me. I couldn't fault her for desiring security. It was a basic human need. But I couldn't reconcile the fact that our relationship wasn't built on the mutual love and trust one had believed in. That night, as I sat alone after she left the room, I felt a hollowness I couldn't shake. I had built my aspirations around her, entrusted her with my heart, and now I was confronted with the realization that those dreams might have been one-sided. The clarity I sought had arrived, but it brought with it a pain I wasn't sure how to navigate. I knew I couldn't move forward blindly anymore. Something fundamental between us had shattered, and I wasn't sure it could ever be mended. I sat on the park bench, my hands gripping the cool wooden slats beneath me. The world around me felt distant, the rhythmic sound of children laughing, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the faint hum of conversations from passing strangers. I had asked her to meet me here, away from the house, away from curious eyes. I needed space to say what had to be said, though the words felt heavier than I expected. When she arrived, she appeared calm, her usual confidence radiating through every step. For a fleeting moment, I doubted myself. Could I truly go through with this? But then I remembered the ache in my chest when she admitted her motivations, the hollow feeling that followed. I told her we needed to talk. She sat beside me, her expression turning cautious. I didn't prolong it or soften the truth. I explained that I couldn't disregard what I'd come to realize, that a relationship founded on unequal emotions wasn't sustainable. I told her I desired a partner who loved me for who I was, not merely what I could provide. Her reaction wasn't what I anticipated. I braced for sorrow or regret, but what I saw instead was defensiveness. She accused me of being unreasonable, of failing to comprehend her perspective. Her voice rose slightly, a mixture of indignation and hurt. She stated she had every right to desire security, that after everything she'd endured, she deserved the life she envisioned. I allowed her to speak, though her words only deepened the chasm between us. When she finished, I explained as calmly as I could that I wasn't angry with her for wanting stability. I understood how her past had shaped her, but I couldn't be the person she relied on for it if love wasn't her core motivation. Her response was sharp, accusing me of being self-righteous and asserting that I was overreacting. She claimed I was discarding everything we had built together, that no one else would give her what I had. Her words stung, but they only confirmed I was making the correct choice. By the time she walked away, her shoulders stiff with frustration, I felt depleted. I remained on the bench long after she disappeared, gazing at the ground and trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. In the days that followed, the consequences spread. My family, who had been so invested in the wedding, reacted with shock and bewilderment. Some were supportive, offering quiet words of encouragement. Others, particularly those who had grown close to her, questioned my decision. They urged me to reconsider, pointing out how much effort and money had already gone into the planning. Every conversation left me feeling more isolated, but I stood my ground. I began the process of dismantling the wedding, canceling the venue, returning deposits, and reaching out to guests. Each task was a painful reminder of what I'd imagined my future would be. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of what I'd lost felt unbearable. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. Staying would have meant betraying myself, settling for a life not built on the mutual love and trust one needs. Even as the din of opinions and judgments surrounded me, a small, quiet part of me felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the burden of pretense pressing down on my chest. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a step toward reclaiming the life I deserved. It started with a casual comment from a shared acquaintance, the kind of remark that lingers long after the conversation ends. I'd encountered them at a cafe, where we exchanged polite small talk over steaming mugs of coffee. When they asked how I was faring, their tone was light, but the way their eyes shifted suggested they knew more than they were saying. They hesitated before mentioning they'd recently seen her, my ex-fiancée, with someone else. They assured me it was probably nothing, just a coincidence, but the words struck like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples of doubt through my mind. I inquired who it was, but they only shrugged as though they'd already revealed too much. They quickly changed the subject, but my thoughts remained fixed on what they had disclosed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The idea that she might have been seeing someone else nod at me, especially in light of everything I'd already uncovered. Memories I had tried to suppress resurfaced. The secretive phone calls she always took out of earshot, the unexplained nights she claimed to be visiting a friend but never shared details about. At the time, I hadn't questioned her. I trusted her implicitly. Now that trust felt misplaced. I wrestled with a decision for a day or two before contacting a private investigator. It wasn't something I did lightly. The notion of delving into someone's private life felt intrusive, but the need for answers outweighed my reservations. I told myself I deserved to know the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. The days that followed were agonizing. Each morning brought a strange mix of dread and anticipation as I awaited the investigators' updates. I immersed myself in work and mundane tasks, anything to prevent my mind from spiraling. But every phone notification sent a jolt of anxiety through me. When the investigator finally called, their voice was calm, almost detached, as they delivered their findings. What they uncovered left me frozen in place, the air around me feeling colder with every word. She had been meeting with a man I didn't know, a pattern that had been ongoing for months, even before our engagement. The investigator detailed their findings methodically, describing dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, walks in the park, and nights spent at a hotel. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it wasn't what it seemed. But then they revealed the deeper layer, the part that shattered whatever illusions I had left. They had uncovered communications, text messages, and emails that painted a picture far worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't just seeing someone else, they had plans. My engagement, my wedding, had been nothing more than a meticulously constructed step in their larger scheme. She had intended to use our marriage as a source of financial support, not just for herself, but for both of them. I was never the destination. I was the means to an end. I sat in stunned silence as the investigators' words sank in. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated, deliberate. She had woven herself into my life with precision, crafting an illusion of love and commitment while building a future with someone else in the shadows. When the call ended, I stayed in the same spot for what felt like hours, staring at the report they had sent over. It was all there in black and white, undeniable and damning. I thought back to every moment we'd shared, every smile and promise, now tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening behind the scenes. For days, I wavered between anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of relief. As much as it hurt to face the truth, I was grateful that I had ended the engagement before she could carry out her plans. The thought of what might have happened if I hadn't discovered this weighed heavily on me. I considered confronting her, imagining the things I might say, the questions I might demand answers to. But the more I thought about it, the less I saw the point. Nothing she could say would undo what had been done. Her choices had already spoken for her. Instead, I focused on processing what I had learned. I confided in a close friend, someone I trusted implicitly, and their quiet support reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I felt. I began to take small steps toward rebuilding my sense of self, leaning into hobbies and routines that had nothing to do with her. There was no instant catharsis, no magical moment where the pain disappeared, but little by little I began to feel the weight lifting. The betrayal still stung, and the scars would remain, but I found strength in knowing I had made the right choice. As I closed the investigative report and set it aside, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was closure nonetheless. She had shown me who she was, and now I could finally move forward without her shadow looming over my future. The train station was quiet in the early morning, the platform bathed in soft gray light as the sun struggled to penetrate the clouds. My suitcase rested at my feet, its wheels scuffed from years of use. It wasn't much, just enough for a week away, but it felt like more than luggage. It felt like the burden of everything I was prepared to leave behind. I hadn't planned this journey for long. It came to me on a whim after weeks of attempting to regain my footing. I desired to go somewhere simple, somewhere that demanded nothing from me. The coastal town I'd chosen wasn't far, just a few hours by train, but it felt distant enough to grant me the space I needed. The train ride was peaceful, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels soothing in a way I hadn't expected. I gazed out the window as the city yielded to rolling fields and eventually glimpses of the sea. The scenery blurred as my thoughts drifted, replaying everything that had brought me to this point. The months following the breakup had been more difficult than I let on. Each day was a struggle between allowing myself to grieve and pushing forward. There were moments when the pain of betrayal felt unbearable, when anger and sadness swirled together in a storm I couldn't escape. But there were also glimmers of light, small victories like finishing a book I'd intended to read or successfully throwing my first pot in a ceramics class I joined. Pottery became my anchor in a way I hadn't anticipated. At first, I enrolled in the class just to keep busy, but it quickly became more than that. The sensation of the clay beneath my hands, the way it resisted and yielded in equal measure, mirrored the internal process I was undergoing. Each piece I crafted was imperfect, but there was beauty in the imperfection, in the act of creating something entirely my own. The town was precisely what I'd hoped for, a quiet, charming escape. Its cobblestone streets wound through rows of colorful cottages, and the air carried the faint scent of salt and wildflowers. I spent my days exploring without a plan, allowing my curiosity to guide me. I wandered into hidden alleys, stumbled upon small art galleries, and lingered in bookshops that seemed untouched by time. One afternoon, I found myself on the beach. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the waves crashing in a steady rhythm that felt almost meditative. I stood at the water's edge, letting the foam lap at my toes, and stared out at the horizon. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet kind of peace. The trip wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding clarity. The betrayal I'd endured wasn't something I could simply erase, nor did I wish to. It had shaped me, taught me lessons I hadn't sought but desperately needed. I thought about her sometimes, about what she might be doing, whether she regretted her choices, or if she'd moved on without a second thought. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. On my second-to-last day in the town, I received a message from her. It was brief, almost casual, as though nothing had transpired between us. She inquired how I was doing, said she hoped I was okay. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. A part of me wanted to reply, to demand answers, to hear her confess what she had done. But then I realized I didn't need anything from her anymore. Her chapter in my life was closed. The answers I sought wouldn't alter what had happened, nor would they give me the closure I'd already found within myself. I deleted the message without responding, feeling lighter for it. On my final day, I hiked up a small hill that overlooked the ocean. The climb was steep, and the wind tugged at my clothes as I reached the top, but the view was worthwhile. The sea stretched out endlessly before me, the waves glinting in the sunlight like shards of glass. I stood there for a long time, allowing the wind to carry away the last remnants of doubt and pain. As I descended the hill, I felt a quiet strength settle within me. This trip hadn't been about escaping. It had been about reclaiming myself, about proving that I could move forward without being defined by what had occurred. When the train pulled out of the station the next day, I watched the town fade into the distance, a sense of gratitude blooming in my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. The scars of the past would remain, but they no longer felt like burdens. Instead, they were reminders of how far I'd come and how much further I could go.